It had been 9 years. 9 years since I had been discarded by my own family, abandoned, with the weight of their indifference pressing down on me. I had always been told I was nothing but a burden, a waste of time and money. Those words haunted me as I wandered the streets, carrying only the clothes on my back and the small amount of money that my mother's rejection had left me with. I had been just another part of the family's carefully curated image, another pawn in their perfectly staged life. But when my mother, Margaret, had looked at me with cold, calculating eyes and told me, "You're a burden." Isabelle, it felt like a bullet through my chest. There was no sympathy in her voice, no hesitation, just the finality of someone who had discarded their own child, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience. My father, Gregory, stood silently behind her, arms crossed, his gaze cold and distant, like a stranger. My younger sister, Elena, stood next to them, wearing that same smug smile she always wore, a face that screamed, "I'm the favorite now," like she had won some unspoken competition. "Figure it out," my father had said, his words clipped and emotionless. The door slammed shut behind me, and that was it. They erased me from their lives like I had never existed. For the next 3 days, I wandered the streets in a daze. I had no place to go, nowhere to turn. I spent my nights curled up behind Rosie's Diner, a small establishment near the edge of town, using the warmth from the kitchen vents to keep me from freezing. The streets were cold, but it wasn't just the wind that chilled me. It was the sharp sting of abandonment that cut deeper than any winter night ever could. The hunger gnawed at me, but I refused to break. I refused to let the cold defeat me. And on the fourth day, when I had finally run out of energy to wander, I found myself standing outside the diner, ready to collapse. Rita Dawson, the owner, found me that morning. She was a woman with a no-nonsense attitude, her gray hair tied back in a tight bun, her sharp eyes assessing me like a problem to be solved. "If you're going to lie here, you might as well make yourself useful," she said, tossing a broom at my feet. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. That was my first break. It wasn't charity. It was survival. I grabbed the broom and I started cleaning. I worked hard, never complaining. By the end of the month, Rita allowed me to sleep in the back room, a small cot in the storage area, where I could rest after my double shifts. With that small step, I began to rebuild. It wasn't much, but it was something. And with every dollar I earned, I saved. By the time I was 20, I had enough to enroll in community college. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had learned that survival was more than just the food and the shelter. It was about determination, about building something that no one could take from you. By 23, I had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious business program. The world began to open up for me, and I walked through those doors with confidence. At 27, I secured an internship at a fast-growing medical startup, and by 30, I had launched my own company in medical nutrition. The empire I was building was mine. It didn't belong to my family, and they had no idea. They thought they had erased me, but I was coming back stronger than ever. They would never know what hit them. I had thought about it for years, about how I would make them regret abandoning me. The thought had consumed me during sleepless nights, in moments of triumph, and even in my darkest hours. But tonight, I wasn't just going to be a reminder of their mistakes. I was going to make them face the reality of their actions. I found out about the gala through a mutual acquaintance. My mother, the ever-present socialite, had been planning this elaborate anniversary celebration for months. The guest list was full of their business partners, their closest friends, and of course, Elena's fiancé, Ryan Sterling, who had become part of their perfect picture of a happy family. They had made it all, the life they had built, the image of success, but none of it had ever been real. And tonight, I would show them just how fragile it all was. The venue was the Grand Cascade Hotel, a place where only the elite could afford to hold events. The grand ballroom shimmered with gold chandeliers and crystal glasses, filled with laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was a night of opulence, a night where they thought they could flaunt their success. But tonight, the only thing they would be flaunting would be their hypocrisy. As I entered the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor, I could feel the eyes of the guests on me. Their curious glances turned to whispers. They recognized the tension before they even recognized me. My mother, Margaret, was at the center of the room, as always, with Gregory at her side, standing tall and imposing. Elena stood next to them, her smug expression in place, her eyes already scanning the crowd as she preened under the attention. She caught sight of me first, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're not on the guest list," Elena called out loudly, her voice dripping with condescension. She wanted to humiliate me, to remind me of my place. But I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to cower like I had when I was a child. I wasn't the same girl they had discarded. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my gaze locked onto my family. The whispers around the room grew louder, the tension thicker. I could feel my mother's grip on her champagne glass tighten. I could see the flicker of unease in Elena's eyes. They expected me to beg for attention, to plead for their acknowledgement. But I wasn't here to beg. I was here to show them who I had become. I smiled, slow and deliberate, watching as Ryan Sterling, Elena's fiancé, stiffened beside her. His smirk disappeared in an instant, replaced by the unmistakable look of shock. For the first time, he looked like he had seen a ghost. I tilted my head slightly, letting the silence stretch between us. I knew they could feel the weight of the moment, the tension, the anticipation. I wasn't just here to disrupt their perfect lives. I was here to remind them of what they had lost with quiet control. I spoke the words that would shatter the fragile facade they had worked so hard to build. "Do you really not know who I am?" The room went silent. Conversations halted. Champagne glasses were frozen mid-air. The guests turned to look, their whispers turning into gasps. I watched. My mother's eyes narrowed. I saw the flicker of doubt in Elena's eyes, and the uncertainty creeping into Ryan's expression. They had no idea what was coming. They thought I was weak. They thought they could erase me. But I was Isabelle Carter, and I was back to claim what was mine. The room was buzzing now, whispers echoing through the grand ballroom like a rising tide. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut through with a knife. I could feel the eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't my first confrontation with my family, and it wouldn't be my last. But this time, I wasn't the helpless girl they had cast aside. This time, I had control. This time, I would make them regret every word they had ever said to me. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy, suffocating. My gaze never left my mother's face, her perfectly made-up face that looked so out of place in the midst of everything that was about to unfold. Her eyes darted between me and the guests, her grip on her champagne glass tightening. She had never liked losing control, and tonight she was about to lose everything. Elena stood beside Ryan, her face a mask of confusion at first, then one of disdain. She straightened up, that insufferable smirk returning to her lips. But I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it. "You don't belong here." Elena sneered, her voice cutting through the growing murmur of the crowd. She was desperate to assert her place, desperate to make everyone else believe she was still the favorite, still the one who mattered. "You're nothing but a joke." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached into my clutch. Pulling out a neatly folded sheet of paper, I took my time unfolding it, allowing the silence to grow, allowing the anticipation to build. I saw the shift in the room. The guests were starting to realize that something serious was about to happen. Their eyes were no longer filled with curiosity. Now they were sharp with suspicion, waiting for the bombshell that was coming. I held the paper up just enough for Ryan to see. His face drained of color the moment his eyes scanned the document. His hand trembled slightly as he tightened his grip on the glass of champagne in his hand. I could see the realization hitting him. "What is this?" Ryan's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but there was a sharp edge to it. He looked at me, then back at the paper. His jaw tightened, and I saw his fingers flexing at his side. "Oh, this," I said, letting my voice drop into a mocking tone. "It's your little fiancé's academic record." I paused, letting that sink in. "The one that proves she never finished medical school." The reaction was immediate. A murmur ran through the crowd, ripples of disbelief spreading like wildfire. Elena's confident facade began to crumble. She shifted uncomfortably next to Ryan, her fingers clenching into fists at her sides. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ryan's face twisted in confusion, then in anger. He stared at the paper, disbelief flashing across his features. "This is some kind of joke," he muttered, his voice tight. She's just lying." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You can believe whatever you want, Ryan, but the facts are right there, in black and white, and I'm afraid your fiancé never made it through medical school." Elena's eyes darted between me and Ryan, her expression flickering from anger to panic. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her perfect little world, and it was almost satisfying to watch. But it didn't end there. No, this was just the beginning. I had only scratched the surface of what I had planned for them. As the whispers around the room grew louder, I could see the panic creeping into Elena's eyes. But I wasn't done yet. No, I had far more to reveal, and I wasn't about to let them off the hook just yet. I glanced over at my mother. She had been standing in the background, her face pale as she watched the chaos unfold. She had always prided herself on being in control, the matriarch of the family, the one who could manipulate every situation to her advantage. But now she was just a spectator, watching as the world she had so carefully constructed began to crumble before her eyes. I took a step closer to her, my gaze never leaving hers. I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. I could see the realization starting to sink in. She knew this wasn't going to end well for her. "Oh, Margaret," I said, my voice sweet, almost syrupy. "You should know better than anyone that I don't make accusations. I present facts." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute, her knuckles white. She wasn't used to being challenged, let alone exposed. But I had more. I reached into my clutch again and pulled out a sleek black USB drive. Holding it up between two fingers, I let the room fall into silence once again. "This," I said, my voice light, casual, "is a little something I've been working on. It's all the financial documents and emails you've been so careful to keep hidden. The ones that show exactly how your precious family-run clinic has been committing insurance fraud for years." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Margaret's eyes widened in horror as she took a step back. She had no idea I knew. No idea that I had uncovered the entire operation. "You can't be serious." Gregory, my father, finally spoke, his voice low but controlled. I could see the faintest twitch in his jaw, the only sign of the fear he was trying to suppress. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied, my voice ice cold. "I've got bank statements, legal documents, emails, proof that your family's empire isn't built on hard work and integrity, but on fraud. You've been using your clinic to scam the insurance companies, and now everyone knows. The only thing left to do is decide what happens next." The guests were in complete shock now, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright horror. They had come to this gala expecting nothing more than a night of champagne and small talk, but instead they were witnessing the unraveling of a family's entire empire. Gregory tried to regain some semblance of control. He stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "This is ridiculous. You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know anything." I stepped closer to him, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step measured and deliberate. "Oh, I know more than you think," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I've got proof." Ryan, still holding the document in his hand, stepped back, his face ashen. I saw him take a deep breath, his grip tightening around the paper. He turned to Elena, his expression one of utter betrayal. "Tell me this isn't true," he demanded, his voice low, barely audible. Elena's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her smirk was long gone now, replaced by something far more desperate. Fear. "Tell me," Ryan repeated, his voice cold and final. "Tell me this isn't true." The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone stood frozen, trapped in the gravity of the moment. Even the most composed guests were now murmuring among themselves, their expressions a mix of disbelief and intrigue. My family, once a powerful, revered by everyone in their social circles, was crumbling under the weight of their own lies. Elena's face was drained of color. She had been the queen of the family, the one everyone admired. But now she looked like a mere pawn, caught in the same game that had been played on me for years. The smirk that had been her trademark was long gone, replaced by a fragile mask of panic. Her hands trembled as she clutched the engagement ring on her finger, her breath shallow and uneven. Ryan, her fiancé, stood beside her, still clutching the document I had exposed. His face was a mixture of shock, betrayal, and guilt. I could see it in his eyes. The walls he had built around himself were crumbling fast. He had trusted Elaine. He had believed her. And now he was left standing there with nothing but the cold truth and the wreckage of his own misplaced faiths. But there was one person in this room who still hadn't spoken up. Gregory, my father. He had been the pillar of the family, the one who held the reins, the one who controlled everything. But now I could see the cracks in his facade. His jaw clenched and his hands shook as he reached for his glass of champagne. But he didn't even take a sip. His posture, once so imposing, now seemed fragile, like a man whose world had suddenly been turned upside down. "Gregory," I said, my voice cold and deliberate, "you never thought this day would come, did you? You thought you could hide behind your wealth and your reputation forever. But you forgot one thing. You can only keep secrets for so long." He turned to face me, his eyes cold and hard. For a moment, I thought he might try to deny everything, try to spin his lies once again. But instead, he stood silent, his gaze flickering between me and the guests, as if he were looking for a way out of this nightmare. Then I dropped the final bombshell. "I have one more thing to show you," I said, reaching into my clutch once more. I pulled out another USB drive, this one sleek and black, a symbol of the secrets I had been collecting for months. The room was eerily silent now, all eyes on me. The guests, once intrigued by the drama, now sensed that something much bigger was unfolding. They could feel the weight of the moment, and they knew it was only a matter of time before everything would be revealed. I held up the drive for all to see. "This," I said, "is the final nail in your coffin. I recently had my identity checked. Imagine my surprise when I found out someone had been filing fraudulent tax returns under my name for the past decade. Someone who just so happens to own a family-run clinic. A family-run clinic that has been scamming the system for years." I watched as the color drained from Gregory's face. His lips parted, but no words came out. He had no defense, no explanation. He was caught, plain and simple. The room erupted into whispers, gasps, and exclamations of disbelief. I could hear people muttering about insurance fraud, tax evasion, and the complete destruction of the Carter family's reputation. No one in the room had ever expected to witness the downfall of a family that had once been untouchable, a family that had played by their own rules for so long. And now their empire was crumbling. I could hear Manning, the director of the hospital where my father had worked for years, stepping forward, his face red with fury. "You told me she had her degree," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You vouched for her, Gregory. You guaranteed her credentials were legitimate. And now this." Gregory flinched at the accusation, his expression faltering for the first time. Dr. Manning's gaze was filled with contempt as he turned to face my father. "You've been lying to everyone for years." Margaret, ever the strategist, straightened up and tried to compose herself. She forced a smile, but it was brittle and fake, and no one was fooled. "Dr. Manning," she began, her voice smooth but laced with desperation. "This is all a misunderstanding. Whatever Isabelle claims or doesn't claim." I cut her off, my voice low but powerful. "It's not a misunderstanding, Margaret. It's the truth." I turned to face Ryan then, who had remained silent for far too long. His eyes were locked on the document I had exposed, his face a mask of disbelief. I watched as he finally let out a slow, shaky breath. For the first time, I saw something close to regret in his eyes. And then, in a move that stunned everyone in the room, he turned to Elena. He yanked the engagement ring from his finger and threw it at her feet. The metallic clink of the ring against the marble floor, deafening in the silence that followed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Elena, stunned, looked at the ring for a moment, her mouth opening and closing as if she were trying to find the words. But none came. Ryan didn't speak. He just turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing there. The broken remnants of her perfect life scattered at her feet. The guests were still in shock, and the whispers grew louder, filled with judgment and disdain. Margaret stumbled back, her perfect facade cracking. Her eyes widened in panic, and she reached out, her voice rising with desperation. "Ryan, sweetheart, let's be reasonable," she pleaded, her voice now frantic. "You and Elena are meant to be together. A few mistakes." Ryan turned to her, his expression filled with something akin to regret. But there was also something else, something colder, something final. "No," he said, his voice firm. "It's not just a few mistakes. It's everything, every word, every lie, every betrayal. I trusted you." And then he was gone. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the moment sinking in. The Carters, once untouchable, once the epitome of wealth and power, were now reduced to nothing but a cautionary tale. Their empire had crumbled, and I had been the one to bring it down. I looked at my family one last time, taking in the wreckage I had left behind. For years, I had wanted revenge, wanted to make them regret what they had done to me. But now, as I stood in the ruins of their perfect little world, I realized something important. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. I was free. Free from their control, free from their lies, free from the suffocating burden of being their discarded child. And as I walked into the night, the city alive with the hum of life around me, I realized that no matter what happened from this point on, I had taken back what was rightfully mine. I had rebuilt my life, not with their help, but without them. And that, I knew, was all that mattered.